Okay, topic of the day. Should you be squatting below parallel or ass to the grass? If you can't do that, what does it mean about your movement patterns, your mobility, your flexibility, whether in active range of motion or passive range of motion? These are the questions we are seeking to answer today. I'm going to answer them in part, and then my good friend Tim Karen, who is the former head strength coach over at West Point and the former associate strength coach at USC, is going to answer those questions in even greater detail. Now, the short answer is yes. Squatting below parallel, ass to the grass, is a perfectly safe and very beneficial movement to do. The problem is most people don't have the mobility and the range of motion to get into that movement. Now, the benefits of that are going to be greater hamstring activation, greater glute activation, greater quad activation, greater knee structural balance. You'll be able to jump higher, run faster. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But again, most people lack the mobility to do that, or they've been coached that it is an improper way to do a squat. Now, what Tim is going to get into is what most people do is actually kind of a variation where they combined a squat pattern with a hinge pattern. So the difference between a deep squat that you would see, something like an Olympic lifter do, or just someone that knows how to squat, and a good morning, which would be more of a hinge of the hips. So he's going to go into those into a little bit greater detail here. I know you guys are going to take something away from this. Again, he's one of the smartest guys that I know in the strength and conditioning field. And the reason that he has kind of a unique perspective about all of this is because he worked in the collegiate setting for a long time, where the predominant philosophy is to not go below 90 degrees, right? To go into an athletic stance, which is just before below breaking parallel. So I hope you guys take away a lot of good information from this. Again, really smart dude. Pay attention because he gets into some very technical details, and I will see you in the next video. What up, Timmy?
All right, so now we want to kind of delineate between what's a squat and a hinge. So a squat, meaning that we want to get as much flexion or bend in that knee as possible relatively to my torso, staying as upright as possible. So sitting down. And essentially a hinge is looking at the same thing, just moving up a joint. I want to flex that hip as much as possible with my shins as vertical as possible. So in both cases, we want to flex something and keep something static or vertical. And when we look at Y's, we're trying to align stress or some sort of ability to get some of the tissues where on the front side or the back side really loaded properly. And this is going to lead to a whole other cascade of things that we're going to go into. But when it really start to get like a negatively effective is when we cross over these patterns and we start looking at our squats, start reflecting into a hinge, and I start squatting down like that. Or when I start looking at my hinge and my hinge start coming down like that. What's really happening is there's some sort of tissue or neurological block that's coming in and impacting that pattern. And maybe it's been coached, or maybe you got too much load, but what really leads to it is start leading to pain and dysfunction because we didn't properly delineate between those two movements. And we want to see, okay, what's our rationale for a squat? It's bringing this side of our hip, our ischial tuberosity, as close as I can to the side of my ankle, my lateral malleolus. And then when I look at a hinge, I want to look at bringing my torso down as much as I can by pushing my ischial tuberosity back on a fixed lateral malleolus, or as far away from that lateral malleolus as I can. And as I come up, I load it concentrically. And where we start getting problems in terms of why that's bad in the long run is because when I get into these situations where I'm trying to squat and I get a lot of flesh in there, I start getting tissue length discrepancies of maybe this tissue gets really strong here to here and I can't get that extra degree of freedom, or maybe I start getting back strain or back stress, or maybe I just start getting strong in the wrong range and it's not transferring to some other stuff that I want to do, like running, jumping, playing sports, just being athletic.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about the benefits of getting to that full range of motion in a squat, ass to the grass, hips down to the ankles.
Well, first off is, if we can, great, which we'll go into here in a second, but if we can't, what does that tell us? Right? What limitations do we have? Do we have adequate range of motion and complete control at that range of motion? And if not, what does that tell us we need to do from there? Do we need to overload you? Do we need to put a ton of weight on you? Honestly, no. We need to look at what the underlying cause of that and develop the mobility and the movement pattern to get to that range. And then following that is why we want to train through that full range, because it gets more return for the time we put in. It's like compound interest. If I go to the gym and only have 3 days a week I can actually go, what's gonna bring the most return from those 3 days? Going through a full range of motion, activating more motor units, getting more muscle fibers recruited, training, getting more metabolic every single time I do 1 rep. That's gonna lead to a longer return, and as we start to train 3 days a week as opposed to 6 days a week, partial reps, and then further compounding the issue in the negative way as opposed to compounding the issue in a positive way.
Cool. Okay, what else? When you do get that full range of motion and you are more in a stable position, what are the benefits of doing a deeper range squat?
Okay, so where do we want to go? Maybe we want to look better, right? So if I can get more range and I can burn more calories, train that muscle through a larger range, get more motor units recruited, maybe it leads to a more aesthetically pleasing muscle. But also too, like, it's a fail-safe, right? If I can get full range of motion and now that's the expected position I need to get into, and then I start changing my depth or changing my range to meet the goal, that's when injuries start to occur, right? So we now have some sort of control of like, hey, you should be able to go through a full range of motion because you demonstrated you can, and then all of a sudden you start changing your position or changing your range of motion to meet the demand. And all of a sudden now injuries start to occur. So it's a great tool to keep us in a good position, to keep us in a really safe and not overloading us improperly. But then the final really benefit is, okay, we get transference to the end goal, right? I want to look better. Okay, training through a full range of motion gets a lot more return. I burn more calories, I get more motor units and more muscle fibers recruited. If I want to play sports at a higher level, get through a full range of motion, and all of a sudden now I have controlled end range. So if I'm in a situation where I need to prepare my tissues for a complete excursion of that knee, then I have that ability. If I want to be able to jump higher, run faster, and I have more ability to recruit motor units and muscle fibers at all ranges, I'm going to have a greater expression of force and power. All those things lead to a better net result, performing better, resistance to injury, and then ultimately, if you really do want it, it's actually going to lead to looking better as well.
Okay, great. Have you ever gotten any resistance from clients that came in, said they didn't want to train full range of motion, they wanted to train partial range of motion? You eventually got them on board and they saw amazing results from going full range of motion?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day. And you know, too, I think if we look at it as trainers of like, where's that underlying thought coming from? And maybe it was coming from, I got injured in the gym. Maybe it came from, I did an exercise on my own and got hurt. Maybe I've had previous injury, or maybe I just was told a lot of things. Let's get to the root cause of that. And then, okay, let's start to navigate maybe some of the reason and the rationale and have empathy for where that's coming from. And then, okay, let's start to explain or build our case of why training through full range of motion is really important. What's your end goal? I want to look good in 6 weeks. The best way to get you from point A to point B is getting more value at each one of your sessions and going through a larger range of motion to get us there. Hey, I want to feel better. Okay, well, do you have full range of motion? No, okay, let's do the things that get you there, and then we start overloading that once we get there, not the reverse, where we don't want to load up partial range. We want to be able to get the range and then add the load.
Cool. Anything you want to add?
Squat deep, squat heavy.
That's it. Allegiant in the house. Peace.